Hey everybody, what's up? This is Jim Placebo, and I'm bringing you the first in a series of videos I wanted to do on Dark Souls 2 cosplays. So, the basic idea, making a build that emulates a specific character from somewhere else in the game or some other game. In case you couldn't tell, it's not incredibly obvious, but the first video I want to do is on a cosplay build of Dante from the very popular Devil May Cry series. This build was a lot of fun. It's a very versatile build. Lots of variety here because Dante is a character with a lot of variety throughout the games, and it's actually incredibly viable for PvE, and it's pretty viable for PvP too. So doing this build was a lot of fun. The visual aspect of this build, what I went with was the translucent Helm of Aurous just to fill up the head spot, and also visually it kind of has a demonic-esque look. So you can if you want to do if you want to stretch the lore for yourself, you can say it's kind of like Sparda's shadow. The chest piece, there weren't a lot of trenchcoat options, certainly no really red trenchcoat options, so what I went with was the Wanderer coat, just because it's the closest thing to a trenchcoat you kind of get in the game. The Wanderer coat, I'll show you where you can get it later, but obviously it's the starting coat for the swordsman class, and I'll get into class stuff later. Gloves are with the Archdrake gloves, but there's a lot of different short gloves you can go with. And I went with Lucatiel's trousers because this is supposed to be kind of a DMC4 Dante look, and the red pants were really one of the closest options that I could find. Now, if you don't want to do this look because it's not very close, the colors don't match up completely, you can do something else, which is have no chest piece, and rather than Lucatiel's trousers, you wear Vengarl's boots. And this look I found to be very visually similar to Dante's shirtless look in Devil May Cry 3, which is one of the alt costumes you can get in that game, and also I believe in Devil May Cry 4. So that's a good alternative look, but I preferred Lucatiel's trousers and the Wanderer coat. Now, as you can see, the primary weapon I'm using is the Black Knight Greatsword. That was the Greatsword I found to be closest in visual similarity to the Rebellion. And the Black Knight Greatsword's moveset is pretty solid. You've got stabs and thrusts, or you've got thrusts and slashes. It's a pretty solid moveset, and the damage output is very good as well. In place of Ebony and Ivory, I'm using dual raw light crossbows. Now for crossbows, it's really a matter of preference. You can use light, heavy, you can use Ascetics or New Game Plus to get dual Avalons, or you can get the dual Sanctum crossbows. Really, just as long as it's two crossbows and you have the ability to power stance them so you can fire them both at once, it'll work. And obviously you want to get a lot of bolts. Basically, the second you can unlock the ability to buy infinite bolts, you want to do that, just so you can continuously restock yourself on bolts. Now, as we know, Dante is a character who has a lot of variety in his weaponry, because one of the core elements of Devil May Cry gameplay is switching through a variety of different weapons, or devil arms. So, one of the other options I had to use was the Pursuer's Ultra Greatsword. This is a great weapon I found for this build because it has very solid damage. Obviously, it's one of the lower Ultra Greatsword damage outputs, but its damage is incredibly solid still, and I found it to be incredibly fast for an Ultra Greatsword. I looked on some message boards online when I was putting this build together, and this weapon was one that was offered up, and a lot of people said, no, you don't really want to use it because it's a little bit too big, and also it's a little too slow. But I found it to be incredibly fast, and its moveset is incredibly solid. And a lot of these movesets are very stylish, I thought, so I also thought that fit with Dante's kind of stylish personality and just the stylish theme of the Devil May Cry games overall. So this you could use as Alastor or one of the other kind of swords that Dante has. Now, for the Force Edge, I used the Mirrah Greatsword. It has a very solid visual representation, but as far as actually using it in the game, I didn't very often, just because when you compare it with the other great swords you can use, its damage output is low. Now, in the place of the Scythe Dante gets, the Nevan Scythe, I found that there were two scythes that you could use. The one that I decided to go with was the Scythe of Want for this move specifically. Ain't that shit just the stylish, most stylish? Wow, words, man. Just because of that. Again, I didn't use it that much because I had a lot of other weapon options to use. But again, Dante's all about variety and experimenting with other things, and I thought this was a fun weapon to use, you know, if you're into scythes. I'm not very much, but I thought it was fun still. A weapon combo I did use was the red rust weapons dual-wielded, because if you dual-wield the red rust weapons, that's a very solid Agni and Rudra, and dual red rust weapons are very fun to use. As you can see, if you put the Scimitar in your primary hand and the sword in your offhand, you get the curved sword power stance moveset, which is incredibly fun and incredibly... I guess the right word is that it has a lot of variety. You can do a lot of stuff, and you can do, like, a lot of stuff with them unpower stanced. But power stancing is where they become the most fun, I find. Just because, you know, a lot of mix-ups, a lot of light into heavy, a lot of light into light heavy. I'll show you here when I get full bar again. You can do, like, light, and then heavy. And their damage output is very good. They both have very good scaling. As you can see, the sword has S scaling in strength, so that gets it some incredibly solid damage. The Scimitar, even though it has very low scaling in strength and dex, at full upgrade, it still has very good scaling bonus damage. So you can put some very quick attacks out there with very high damage output. Now, the next weapon I'll show off is what I used in place of the Awakened Sparda, which was the Curved Dragon Greatsword. This weapon has S scaling in strength and B scaling, or S scaling in dex, sorry, and B scaling in strength, and just look at it. It's probably the closest thing I've found in the game to Sparda's Awakened form. The next one I was considering was the Smelter Ultra Greatsword, but just, I didn't think it was as visually close, so it wasn't as visually enjoyable. And this thing's moveset is also very solid. The Curved Greatsword moveset is, you know, it's good. It has good durability. Obviously, the one thing that you might be complaining about is the reach, which isn't great compared to the other Curved Ultra Greatswords, or rather Curved Greatswords, but it's still an incredibly solid weapon. So, I believe that ties us off on weapons. Let's get into, well, actually, one last thing. Obviously, because of it's Dante and how Devil May Cry as a game works, you won't be having any shields. So, this will be a shieldless build if you want to try and do this. But it's still very fun, and as long as you get the right stats aligned, you won't have to worry about shields, because you'll be doing a lot of rolling and dodging. You'll be playing in a very Devil May Cry reminiscent way. So, let's get into the next part, which is player status and info. Well, let's look at player info first. So, right now I'm in the Pilgrims of Dark Covenant. That's just because I'm trying to do finishing up some gameplay completion stuff. I didn't really consider Covenant to be very important to the game, or to the cosplay. But you can see I started with the Knight class. Now, obviously you can start with whatever class you want and take your stats to wherever you want. I know a lot of people who are replicating this build will probably try and be starting as deprived so that they can take their stats up to where they need or want them to be the quickest. But I started with Knight just for that good early on balance of strength and dex, which I found to be very important for this build. Let's get into status so you can see all my stats there. See, I brought strength and dex up both fairly high, but neither of them to 40. I brought Vit pretty high, just because a lot of these weapons you'll be using, like the Scythe of Wands or the Pursuer's Ultra Greatsword, do run on the heavy side, and you do want to keep your equip load pretty low. I took mine to the extreme of making sure it's just under 30 so that I can have the most optimal roll distance. But really, as long as you have a at least under 50 roll, I would say, your build is solid. You can look at all the other stats. Strength and dex, as I said, are good. Adaptability, vigor, and endurance I just brought to the soft caps at 20. And int and faith, you can see I brought to 18. That was just for wielding the Black Knight Greatsword and the Scythe of Want. That was just so I didn't suffer any damage debuffs when I use these weapons. So, if you want to do that, or if you don't want to bring them up to the max for the weapons and just live with the damage debuffs, you can. You should still attack at normal speed, although I haven't done a lot of tests with that. But I brought them to the max just for the sake of making sure that I didn't suffer from damage for that. So, and the level I wound up at was at 153. You can take a few, if you want to stick at like 150. I don't stick to a specific soul level very religiously. I just get my stats to a comfortable area and decide to stop using souls after that point. But if you want to take your stats just to 150, as you can see, you can still get pretty close to this build, and you can just pull a few points out of strength and dex, and then 1 or 2 out of vit, or basically any of the other stats. All you really want to focus on is int and faith for if you want to use the Greatsword and the Scythe. I would say that getting those stats to their specific place is important, just because you don't want to be suffering any major damage debuffs. Also, making sure that you have strength and dex at enough to at least power stance the red rust weapons, I would say, is important. Just because if you're not power stancing them, I'd say you're missing out on a lot of what these weapons have to offer in terms of combat variety and damage output. Because none of their solo attacks, how you mix them up, quite gives the same feel in terms of combat as the power stance moveset. So I would say it's very important to bring strength and dex at least high enough to get decent scaling damage out of and power stance these weapons. So now I'm going ahead and fighting the last giant, the first boss of the game. Well, technically first, but I'm going ahead and fighting him here so that I can show off some of the combat capabilities and just in general what combat kind of looks like with this build. I went ahead and used a bonfire aesthetic to bring the boss's health up and make him tougher, because I'm pretty much finished with my first run through the game with this build, and I'm just tidying up the last DLC in preparation for considering taking this boss through New Game Plus. So I went ahead and used an aesthetic to make the fight a little bit tougher, but it's the last giant, so I still didn't take the boss all that seriously, as you'll see. Yeah, at first I forgot to even draw on my weapon, but you saw that damage output and that hit that followed it, but you saw that damage output. That was still a pretty big chunk of damage. Now, all my weapons are max upgraded, but they can still do some great damage when they're not. So I start with the Black Knight Greatsword, but then I switch to the Red Rust weapons. Those were probably my favorite weapons to use in this build, because I like Greatswords. Oh god, I fucking tanked so many hits. I didn't take this boss fight very seriously at all, so because of that, I took a lot of hits, but you can still see some of the great damage that this build can put out. As you can see, I'm doing insane amounts of damage in these combos against this boss. And now I switch to the Ultra Greatsword, the Pursuer's Ultra Greatsword, just to finish the boss off, and you can see every aspect of this build is great in different ways, but all of them can shoot out huge amounts of damage. So with this last hit, I finished the boss. So that's kind of what combat looks like with this build. It's very fun and it's very rewarding. So that pretty much finishes up this video. If you guys enjoyed, go ahead and let me know, you know, the basic stuff, rate, comment, subscribe. I'll let you know now, I do have a video for Virgil planned and on the way, so look forward to that, and let me know what you liked and disliked about this video. You know, if you wanted to see less of the stats and more of the combat, or a more in-depth look at what stats for this build are like, let me know what you guys want, and thanks again for watching.